One last thing I want to do on stock valuation, which is the hardest part of stock valuation, is your growth rate. Remember, you're going to take the dividend for next year divided by the discount rate minus the growth rate. What is that growth rate? So I start with the U.S. economy. How fast would the U.S. economy grow? So I like to use inflation plus productivity plus labor growth. That's how an economy grows. You can get those numbers off the internet. Historically, I can even maybe show you. Yeah, I won't show you the charts, but right now our inflation's somewhat elevated. Y'all know what the recent numbers are. So CPI has been like 3.8%, but that's not the Fed's number. What number does the Fed use? They use the PCE deflator. That's about 2.8. Why are those two numbers so different? I would definitely research that. But probably the biggest reason is CPI is heavily weighted toward housing, whereas the PCE is not hit. But you should know these inflation numbers. But let's say that's about 2%, because that's what the Fed's targeting. What's inflation in Turkey? Anybody know? I don't know how to spell Turkey the way they spell it now. 72%. That's pretty high inflation, isn't it? Y'all know what Erdogan's been saying about inflation. He got himself in a lot of trouble on that one. He still got reelected, so it's like no one cared. But inflation, productivity. What is productivity? Anybody know? It's a really, really important number. It's the most important number for your wealth as a U.S. citizen. So productivity is how much we produce, how much that grew, divided by how many workers we added. So let's think about this. It's a pretty important number. If our economy less inflation grew, say, 3.2%, I think that's the last number, and we added 1.2% in labor hours, what is productivity? So we grew our economy 3.2, but we only added 1.2 hours of work. What's productivity? 2%. Pretty simple, right? 3.2 minus 1.2. That's how the Federal Reserve does it. I don't know how they get hours worked, because when I was working at USA, no one asked me how many hours I was working when I wasn't getting overtime. But somehow they come up with that number. It must be a survey to corporations. Even my USA didn't know how many hours I worked. I was working some ridiculously long hours, but wasn't getting paid for the extra hours. But somehow they know that. This is the single most important number for any economy. So in the United States, we've averaged about 2% over the long term. It's actually done pretty well here. Recently, COVID really messed that up. Some countries like the UK and a lot of Europe, their productivity numbers are horrendous, really struggling. But that is the wealth of nations. The higher your productivity, the wealthier you are as a nation. So what is that number? Recently in the US, we've been struggling to get to 2%. Historically, it's been about 2%. What drives it? Well, AI might drive it for bad reasons, right? What might AI do? Grow our economy with fewer workers. That's not good. The people that are working are going to do great, but the people who don't work are going to lose their job. It could be that. It could be alternative energy. We find some new energy, like maybe nuclear fusion. They figure that out or something. It could be, who knows what could hit that. There are some negatives there. But 2% has been a tough number. You can get this out of the Federal Reserve. You just do Fed productivity. I'd recommend you research this. It is an incredibly important number. You can see the recent number, 3.2, which is an incredibly strong number. You can see the impact of 2020. But yeah, this is extremely important number. But you see over time what it's been. You see how weak it's been this last decade. well below the historical norm. So extremely important number. I don't think I'm mentioning in this class, but The Economist, I love The Economist, highly recommend you read it. But when President Obama left office, he wrote an article in The Economist about what was his biggest regret. And he said weak productivity was his biggest regret, because that's the wealth of a nation. And his focus was on education. How do you improve education and training? Because you can train people to be better workers, they can do more, and they're going to be more productive. So that's a key number. And then the last one is labor growth. That's another really interesting number. What do you notice about COVID? Did that have an impact on the number of workers in the United States? Pretty dramatic, but what else do you notice? Look at this decade here. What do you notice about the number of workers? Flat. It's the only decade in United States history where we had fewer workers at the end of the decade than when we started. It's actually a negative number. What's going to drive this number? Who's leaving the workforce? Baby boomers. You're hoping they leave, right? Because you want their jobs. Why aren't they leaving as fast as they're supposed to? They have $70,000 saved for retirement. How long are they going to make it on 70,000 and Social Security, right? So there's a lot of them, they can't leave because they don't have enough money saved up. But we've been saying the baby boomers are going to leave. Who's going to take their place? You are, immigrants are. So we're hoping we get a lot of immigrants, especially highly trained immigrants coming into the country. But yeah, if the baby boomers all start leaving, we're going to have to replace them. Or what else could replace them? Robots, AI. So we don't know. So you guys have a much scarier feature than I did, but you also have a more exciting one. It can work out really great or really horribly. People are talking about AI is going to destroy us all. I don't know if that's the case, but we'll see. Extremely important numbers, because these are the three numbers that drive economic growth. If you want to be wealthy 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you better hope the US has extremely strong productivity improvements, that you're working for a firm that's very productive. That's what you're after. So I think you can argue the US economy can grow 4 to 6%. Now, President Trump, he was talking about 5-6% GDP growth. I think he meant real. That's before inflation. I don't think that's possible in the United States. 4 to 6% includes inflation. The productivity number, the GDP number you hear reported is real, which is without the inflation piece. That in the United States has been around 2 to 3% for the longest time. You can look these numbers up. You see how easy it is to look for them. You just type Fed, which is the St. Louis Fed, real GDP. There it is. You can see COVID again. You can edit it and do percentage change a year ago. And again, look how much wilder it was. It's much tamer here, but much lower too. 2.5, 1.5, 2.3, and then COVID was just ridiculous. The last number was really strong. 3.2 is a really, really strong number. Our economy has been doing extremely well the last few years. No one seems to notice because the inflation number has been bugging people so much. But the US economy, how's it done versus Europe? Anybody follow that? Who's been doing better? US by a bunch, right? I think I saw this last decade. It's like US economy has grown twice as fast as Europe. That's huge. How's the US stock market done versus Europe? Much, much, much better, right? So economic growth is huge. Your belief about economic growth is going to be a major driver. Stocks are not going to grow at 10%, grow their earnings at 10% if the economy is growing at 4%. It's just not possible. So you start with that. You remember the H model had two numbers, growth short term and growth long term. Y'all remember that in that formula? This economic growth will probably be your growth long term or somewhere close to it. Then the growth short term can be any number, but most firms ultimately are going to grow about the same speed as the economy. So I'll start there. So have some idea. I'm trying to encourage you to have these numbers in your mind. 2% inflation, 2.5% productivity growth, maybe 0.5% growth, or water and labor. Having those three numbers in your mind can give you a sense of how fast things can grow. Once you do that, then you think about your industry. Is your industry growing faster than average or more slowly than the average? Where is it in its product life cycle? So there is a wonderful video I highly recommend. Demo Darren life cycle, not book. You don't want the book. You want the YouTube. This is a wonderful, wonderful video right here. Have any of y'all seen this one yet? So y'all probably talked about life cycle in some of your classes. Your firms start off, they have high growth, they mature, and then they decline. Great video. What he's saying in this video is you need a CEO that recognizes how old his company is. If it's a startup company, he shouldn't be, or she shouldn't be doing a lot of debt. Debt is something you do when you're a mature company and you can handle the debt. Startup companies shouldn't be doing that. So he says, he kind of makes it comical. You've got a 70-year-old that's trying to look like a teenager. Have y'all seen someone dress, they're 70 and they're trying to dress like a young person? It's kind of pathetic looking, isn't it? And that's what he's saying. A mature firm that's trying to act like a young startup firm is just pathetic. Same thing with a young firm. You see some 20-year-old looks like they're dressed like someone, like their grandparents. That's pretty bad too. So he's talking about how should a firm be in each one of these stages. Startup, young growth, high growth, mature, stable, and decline. He says when you manage each one of these firms, you got to manage them for where they're in a life cycle. That's also going to impact what kind of growth rate you're going to come up with. So I highly recommend this one. He has a couple of them. This one, you can tell he did it from home, probably because during COVID. He has another one where he's not doing it from home, where he's actually in a presentation. So that one's probably the better one, but really, really good. All of his videos are good. If you're a finance major, I would just watch a Darren YouTube video once a week. Just make it part of your normal kind of, what did I call it in the investment side last week? Your non-negotiable. You're going to watch a Darren every week. So, so that's important. Have y'all had Porter's 5 Forces yet? Who in here has heard of Porter's? Have you? All right. Anybody remember the 5 Forces? So you have industry barriers to entry. How hard is it? So you want to start a new airline? How hard would that be? Pretty expensive, right? You got to buy airplanes. You got to get the hub. You got to get the gates, which is pretty expensive. So high barriers to entry. You want to start a new restaurant? How would that be? Not too difficult, right? You can rent out space. You can start a new restaurant pretty easily. So high barriers to entry protect your industry, which means you can grow faster than other industries. The second one is buyer power. What kind of power does your buyer have? If they got a lot of power, it's going to weaken your growth. They don't have weak power, it's going to strengthen your growth. You have supplier power. That's really, really important. How powerful are your suppliers? You have the substitution threat. Could another industry come in and take over everything you're doing? That's what we're worried about, artificial intelligence. And then you have the how much rivalry is there in the industry? You have 1 or 2 really big players, or there hundreds. So there's some industries that are pretty concentrated in a few players. They got a lot of power. They can grow faster. Some industries like restaurants, there's just too many people playing and it's just tough. So Porter's is one of the most important theories in finance and in marketing and in strategy. You'll probably see it in strategy. I would become an expert on Porter's. Wikipedia does a great job on Porter's. I would read through that. If you like Warren Buffett, he refers to something called economic moats. If you're interviewing as an accountant or finance major, I would try to work that concept of a sustainable competitive advantage. So anybody heard that term before? So, y'all heard economic moat before? So what economic moat means is you're growing fast. You got a really fast growing company. Well, If you're doing really, really well, what's everybody else going to do? They're going to try to copy you to come into your industry. But if you have some protection that keeps them out, that's what would be an economic moat. And that will give you sustainable competitive advantage. You can grow fast without attracting a lot of competitors because you're keeping them out.
So an example, kind of like a patent, like you want to patent.
Patent is one.
Of this kind of copying your exact thing.
Yeah, pharmaceuticals really, patents are extremely important for them. Definitely. NVIDIA probably has some protections like that. Patents have gotten a little weaker because the government, when it gives a patent, it also, someone doesn't like the non-competition of it. So another one is brand name. You have a really strong brand name, like a Ferrari. You can grow faster just because you have that brand name and people buy you because of brand name. The biggest new one in the last few years, have y'all heard of this one? It's called the network effect. What's the network effect? Right. So network effect, it's the opposite for restaurants. For restaurants, really popular, what happens? You show up and what do you have to do? You have to wait for an hour. More customers does what? Makes the experience much worse. A network effect is more customer makes the experience better. And that means one player can dominate. And that's what Meta does. You can see that Google kind of had that in the search, right? When your company's name becomes a verb, I'm going to go Google that. You know, you've got that kind of network effect because everybody's using it because everybody's using it. So yeah, network effect has been a huge one. So there's several of those. There's some overlap with porters in that, but this is really, really important concept for growth. If you have a sustainable competitive advantage, you can grow faster than everybody else and keep everybody else away for some time. That's a huge, huge advantage. So that's your industry. Porter is really important. The other thing with Porter that I highly recommend is Porter's value chain. I would be reading that. There's certain things that are just so critical to understanding business. I've seen some other models, but they all somewhat copy Porter. So extremely important stuff. And then the last thing is your company. And it's the same thing, sustainable competitive advantage. Porter has what he calls competitive strategies, which is cost leadership and differentiation. So you're trying to figure out how's the economy growing, how's this industry growing, and how my company's doing. That's when you get into market share and those type of things. And that's back to where we talked about asset turnover and margin. Is their asset turnover growing? Is the margin expanding? If they're doing that, they're going to grow fast. So yeah, these are the key for understanding growth for any company. You can understand those, you can do pretty well. The market will tell you how fast, and we'll talk some about these ratios. There's something called the PEG ratio, which is the company's PE ratio and their growth rate. So if you take their PE ratio and divide it by the PEG ratio, it tells you what their expected growth is. We'll do that because we're about to go into that. And it's got to be logical. The way it needs to be logical is kind of think of, like with Tesla, you grow Tesla out and you figure out that in 10 years they have 120% of the market, then that's not possible. They can't do that. So, all right. One last thing we got to do with this is relative value. So I want to do this real quickly today. Really, really important. This is out there on Canvas. How many of y'all know relative value? If I say this firm's PE ratio is 32, what does that mean to you? Does it sound high, low, 32? What's the PE rate? What is a PE ratio? Huh? Price to earnings. So it's a relative value. So let's talk about relative value because it's highly used in finance. And in fact, if you're going to start buying stocks in yourself in your own portfolio, you're more likely to use relative value analysis than what we just did with discounted cash flows. It's a more popular approach. So we'll talk about relative value analysis in the context of how you can value stocks. And then we'll talk about what's good relative value analysis versus bad. And we'll talk the most common one. So there's three ways you can do analysis of a company. First one is what you did project one in this class, which is fundamental analysis. You're looking at their turnover, their margin, their debt. That's fundamental analysis. The second one we're not going to do in this class is called technical analysis. I just saw a commercial today pushing technical analysis. And I know it doesn't work because if it works, they wouldn't be selling it to somebody else. If you got a secret to how to beat the market, what do? You don't sell a product, right? You just go do it yourself. But they're selling it. So how do they make money? They make money by selling their bad model to other people because the model doesn't work. That's technical analysis. If you take my secure analysis class, I don't think I saw any of y'all in that class this next semester. It's my hardest class, but they do have one paper where they do technical analysis, which is actually the easiest paper in that class. You can learn this so easily by just going on the Bloomberg machine and typing TECH, and they'll bring it all up, everything you need. They'll teach you the whole thing. Bloomberg does a great job on technical analysis. But we're going to talk about relative value analysis. Those are the three ways you can look at something. You can look at it at this asset class level. You can do fundamental analysis of US stocks versus European stocks. You can do technical analysis of US stocks versus European. You can do relative value analysis. Or you can do it at the security level. You can do fundamental analysis of Apple, technical analysis of Apple, and a relative value analysis of Apple. So it works. So you've already done fundamental analysis. So let's real quickly look at relative value analysis. And essentially what you're doing, you're comparing some measure of value, usually a price, to some underlying fundamental factor, and that can be all kinds of things. So a measure of value is going to be either price or enterprise value. Price is pretty straightforward. It's the stock value of the company. Enterprise value is price plus debt. Essentially, it's a little bit more than that, but price versus plus debt. So price is how much it's worth to the stockholders. Enterprise value is the stockholders plus the debt holders, which is really, really key to this analysis. When do you use price? When do you use enterprise value? And then a fundamental value can be all kinds of things, but we're going to focus on earnings, revenue, and book value. But I've seen others. I've done things like what's the value of Tesla divided by its number of employees? So you can use employees if you want to, and there's all kinds of factors you can do. But we're going to focus on those three. So price to earnings is a key one. We're going to see enterprise value. The revenue is pretty key. Price to book value is pretty common. There are some industry-specific ones, like airlines have things like available seat miles and those kind of things that work really, really well. Utilities have their own unique ones, but we'll focus on these three. So relative value analysis is not asking if the stock market is overpriced, underpriced. What it's asking is this stock overpriced, underpriced relative to all the others? The whole market may be overpriced, but at least this one's cheaper than the rest of them. So it's not really asking about valuation. It's really asking about relative valuation. And then we use these terms that I don't like. We call stocks are either cheap or rich. I wish we call them inexpensive, because I don't like the word cheap. The word rich really doesn't mean anything, but I don't know who comes up with these terms, but if you want to sound intelligent in an interview, you use the words cheap and rich. So you say, hey, wow, Apple's really trading cheap right now. NVIDIA is really trading rich right now. Which one would have the high PE ratio? Well, NVIDIA, that's what rich means, all right? So let's do an example from real estate, because we do this in any real estate majors in here. All right, so real estate uses relative value all the time. So let's see. I've got this house you can buy for $150,000. Will you buy it? That's all the information you have. Anybody want it? Would you buy it, Triana? Would you buy it, or would you want more information? More information. It's not much, right? I tell you, a stock's trading for $150. Would you buy it? You might want to know what company it is. You know, here you might want to know the address. What if I tell you the house is $150,000 in that same neighborhood? There's two other houses that just sold, one from $875 and one for $675. Would you buy it now, or would you want more information? What are you worried about here? What's your first thought is there's probably something wrong with this house, right? All right, well, let's try some relative value analysis. Let's say this house is selling for $75 per square foot. The other two houses were trading for $250 and $225 per square foot. Are you getting more interested now? What have we just adjusted the price of the house for the size of the house? That is a relative value analysis. Price per square foot is a relative value analysis. Is that enough though for you to buy the house? You're getting more interested, but there's obviously something going on with this house. But price per square foot. So if I tell you NVIDIA, and we can even look at it and get into Yahoo Finance. Might have already been in there and just forgot. So let's say NVIDIA is trading for a PE ratio of 75, and Apple's trading for a PE ratio of 26. NVIDIA is 75, Apple's 26. Apple's kind of like that $75 per square foot, and NVIDIA is the 250. Just based on that, what do? Well, you buy Apple, it's the cheaper stock. But there may be a reason. Which one of these companies is growing faster? Probably NVIDIA because of AI, but who knows? But the stock market is much more excited about NVIDIA than they are about Apple. This real estate market is much more excited about these two houses than they are about this house. And you might want to know why that is. It could be because this is a great bargain. You should steal it. It could be because this is a really horrible house. Maybe this is a house in California on a cliff and they're going to have a mudslide the next 10 years and the whole house is going to slide off the side. You might not want that house then. So what else can we do? Well, let's say we have some other measures related to value and some related to risk. This is real key. Things related to value, things related to risk. There are websites out there. I don't know if Triana, if you found those, but there are websites that take everything you could want to know about a house, run a regression model, and they're pretty good at predicting what the value of a house is. Who might do that, do you think? Can you think of a company that might do that? Yeah, they may not provide it though, but Zillow, have y'all heard of Zillow? What are they doing? It's regression analysis. They're looking at square feet, they're looking at the neighborhood, they're looking at all kinds of things. I use them. I bought my mom's house. I used the Zillow value, and it was actually pretty accurate because I had to sell her house a few months later. It was actually pretty accurate. They've gotten themselves in some trouble for not being quite as accurate in certain places. But I don't know if I got all the factors they would look at, but the size of the house, that's that square feet. Does it have a pool or not? I would actually pay less for a house with a pool than one with a pool because, I mean, less for a house with a pool because I don't want a pool. Number of bedrooms, how modern is the kitchen? That could be pretty important. How good is the landscaping? How old is the paint? All kinds of things. On the risk side, it could be, are you in a floodplain? If I were in California, I'd be really interested in, fires. How close am I into a place that it could burn down? Mudslides, volcanoes could be important in California. Foundation issues. That's with Mom's house. They had a serious foundation issue. You could see it, unfortunately. But it had been fixed and we had a guarantee from the firm to fix it, and that firm was still in business. So I told the buyer, hey, you buy the house, we can transfer this guarantee to you. You may not care about the nearest fire department, but that could be there. Annoying neighbors, that could be a problem. But you bring all this in, and I get an R squared of 91%. All of these factors, if you looked at 350 homes sold, you can explain 91% of the variation in the prices. And based on that, this house we can buy for 75 bucks. Based on that model, it should be selling for 150 bucks. Now, are you interested in buying it? Looks like if you think all the factors you care about are there, looks like a pretty good deal. You're still wondering, why is it trading for 75 instead of 150? Why isn't, you're still a little bit worried. Same thing with Apple. Why is Apple trading at 26 when NVIDIA is trading for 75? Because I think Apple, when I do all my math, I think Apple should be trading higher, but you can do that kind of math. At least now you have more information. That is essentially what, well, I'll do one more. That's essentially what relative value is doing. I'm gonna look at all the factors for Apple, all the factors for NVIDIA. And based on that, I think Apple should be trading at 35 and it's trading at 26. I think NVIDIA should be trading at 60, but it's trading at 75. That's what you're trying to do. What happens if you're missing a really important factor? You're going to make bad decisions on buying stocks, right? Did I leave out an important factor here? Who knows? I don't know where that model is. I need to go find it. But let's say you can increase your R squared to 98. You add two more factors. Was anyone murdered in the house? And is the house considered to be haunted? When you add those two factors, your value for this house drops from 150 to 80. So obviously something bad has happened in this house. But what if you don't care about these two things? You take these two factors out, the house is worth 150. If you put them in, it's worth 80, but you don't care about those two things. You've got a really good deal on this house, right? You can buy it for 75 and you think it's worth 150. Other people who factor in things you don't care about, they think it's worth 80. Yeah, you got a really, really good deal. And I've seen, there's a lady out, I go to Lotus, my bike rides, they invite me to their parties. And she was telling a story about how her house is haunted. And I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. She was serious about it. I was like, you probably shouldn't tell people that if you want to sell your house, but she's talking about all these weird things going on in their house. Yeah, that can be a factor. If you're going to live in this house for the next 30 years, would you buy it? You think it's worth 150, you can buy it for 75. Yeah, that sounds like a really good deal. What if you're going to sell it in 2 years? You got a problem, don't you? Because the people buying it from you might think these are important, and they'll figure that out. So it really depends. If you're Warren Buffett, you're going to buy this thing for forever and ever and ever. You don't really care what the market thinks. You just care what you think. But if you have to sell in a couple of years, you need to know what are those factors that the market is looking at. You got to figure those out. So that is relative value analysis. It doesn't ask, is the housing market overpriced, underpriced? It's just figuring out that house that you can get for 75, is that overpriced, underpriced versus other houses. So this is the key for relative value analysis. What are the key fundamentals, those value things that you should include? What are the key risk factors? And you got to think about generic ones that work in all industries and then specific to your industry. So retail stocks, you can do a lot of what we did in paper one, which is turnover margin. Those things work really, really well. If you're doing pharmaceuticals or if you're doing energy companies, you got to get much, much more precise on your numbers. So all three have to be in place. The price relative, your fundamentals, and your risk. Those have to be all in place. So your goal is to use the fundamental factors and the risk factors to predict that relative value. Just like with the house, you take all those fundamentals, those risks, and say, I think this house should be trading for 150. So you're trying to predict that. You compare that, what you can get. If you have higher fundamental values, that should give you higher relative values. If you have higher risk factors, that should give you lower relative values. So what is a PE ratio? If I were a finance major, I'd be carrying this in my wallet. We already learned this, right? The price of a stock is dividend divided by KE minus G. Y'all remember that, the good old dividend discount model? What is earnings per share times the payout? That is the dividend, right? If they have $5 in earnings per share and they pay out 20%, that's going to be $1 dividend, right? What is risk-free rate plus beta times market risk premium? We're going to talk about that, but that's your KE and your G. How do we get price to earnings? Divide both sides by earnings, and you get that the PE ratio equals the payout times the risk-free rate plus beta times the market risk premium times minus growth. This right here is a really, really important formula. What is a PE ratio? First of all, it's sensitive to interest rates. When interest rates are high, PE ratios are low. All right, that's what the risk-free rate is, the 10-year treasury. So in 1980, when I went to college, interest rates were like 15%. PE ratios were really, really low, like 8 or 9. Today, interest rates are pretty low. PE ratios are really high. The market risk premium, that's how risky people think the world is. When people are worried and scared to death, that number is high, PE ratios are low. When no one's worried about anything, that number is low and PE ratios are high. These two numbers relate to all stocks, the whole stock market, risk-free rate, market risk premium. The beta and growth are specific to your company. So if your firm is high risk, high beta, you have a low PE ratio. If your firm is high growth, because we're subtracting that, high growth firms will have a high PE ratio. All right. So PE ratios are high when interest rates are low. PE ratios are high when people aren't worried about risk. PE ratios are high when the firm is low risk. PE ratios are high when the firm is high growth. All right. So there's a lot in that formula right there. We're not going to get into the payout, but if you take Dr. Katapakam's class, he'll explain that number. So these are older numbers. I think I put them in maybe the beginning part of the semester. But Zoom was trading at a PE ratio of 263. Does that sound cheap or rich? That's pretty rich, isn't it? You're going to pay $263 for $1 in earnings. It's going to take you a long time to get your stock price back unless they grow really fast. Ford was trading at a PE ratio of 8. Does that sound rich or cheap? That's pretty cheap, right? You pay, if they just keep their earnings the same, you can get all your money back in 8 years. That's a pretty cheap stock. Walmart was trading at 21, Amazon at 94. So is Ford is cheap, or it's slow growth, or it's high risk, or some combination. I don't know if Ford is cheap, but it's definitely slow growth, and it's definitely high risk because they have a lot of debt. Amazon is rich. It could be high growth, could be low risk, but I don't believe that one, or some combination. I don't know what these numbers are today. Some of them may not even be available. So Ford's PE ratio now is jumped up there. They're back up to 12, still pretty cheap. The stock market's like about 20 or so they're cheaper than the stock market. Walmart's PE has really been jumping here recently, but Walmart's up above 30. Why are they above 30? Is that a high growth company or is that a low risk company? Probably low risk, right? More than high growth. So Walmart looks expensive, but it's a low risk company. So it's okay that they're a little expensive. Zoom's sold off, right? Somewhat. Their PE ratio already back down to 30. Remember, they were 200 and something. Now they're back down to 30. Why? I think actually Microsoft is starting to take some of their business, aren't they? You're seeing Teams and Skype is kind of coming back. I really didn't understand why everybody's using Zoom. Any of you figured that out? Why did we suddenly all start using Zoom in 2020? Why didn't we use Skype? Where we're using, I already knew how to use Skype. It's like, I got to learn Zoom now. What's the problem? So Zoom certainly did something great back then, but can they sustain that? And then Amazon's come down quite a bit. They're down at 62. What do y'all think NVIDIA is? We already saw it, right? Didn't we? NVIDIA is trading more expensive than Amazon at 75. That's pretty high. What do you think Tesla is? Is Tesla high growth or low risk or what? 38. They've been much, much higher than that, but 38. Still higher than the average stock, but more expensive than Walmart. So you kind of get a sense of these stocks based. Can y'all think of a really, really high growth? Lilly, what was Lilly doing? They're selling what? That new weight loss drug. How does that look? Why are you paying more for Lilly than you'd pay for NVIDIA? The market's really excited about new drug. That one drug could be billions and billions and billions of dollars to Lilly. Is this stock overpriced? Do you think the market's overhyped this one drug? Who knows? It's going to have some side effect no one is expecting. So those are the kind of things you're looking for. The markets, this also says they're low risk. So they could be expensive because they're really low risk. They could be expensive because high growth, or a combination of the two. You could get both of those at the same time. So a high PE ratio either tells you the stock is overpriced, high growth, or low risk. You don't know which of those it is, and it can be all of those. It could be an overpriced stock, but it is high growth and it is low risk. I don't think NVIDIA is a low risk stock. I think it's actually a high risk stock. All right, so here's the numerators and denominators. What time is it? I think that clock's ready. All right, so we got a little time. All right, so here's your choices. Stock price, which is only the stockholders. Enterprise value is the stockholders and bondholders. So what do you divide by? Price to earnings. What do you divide by? Well, earnings per share belongs entirely to the stockholders because you've already paid your interest expense. So price to earnings makes sense. Y'all remember the BI here and the BI here? What does that mean? Before interest. Who owns that? Stockholders and bondholders, because you haven't paid your interest yet. So guess what you use for these? Enterprise value. Anything that's before interest expense, use enterprise value. Anything that's after interest expense, use price. All right, it's that simple. Revenue. Does revenue on the income statement come before interest expense or after? Before. So what do you use for revenue? Price to revenue or EV to revenue? Use EV because it's before interest. Book value is your assets minus your liabilities. Does that belong to stockholders or bondholders and stockholders? Belongs only the stockholders, right? It's assets minus liabilities. So there you use price to book. What does Yahoo Finance do? Yahoo Finance has one mistake. So PE ratio is fine. Enterprise value, the revenue is fine. Enterprise value, the EBITDA is fine. What's the one mistake they make up here? Price to book, that's fine, isn't it? This one right here, price to sales, that's wrong. You don't use price because sales is before interest expense. They put them both in there for some reason. I don't know why they put them both, but price to sales, you should not have that one. You should strike that out. So now what does this trailing and forward mean? So trailing is their price divided by the last 12 months of earnings. The forward is their price divided by the earnings expected over the next year. All right, so you'd expect the trailing to be higher than the prior. What does TTM stand for? That is the trailing 12 months. Okay. And then the PEG ratio is the PE ratio divided by what the market thinks their earnings are going to grow the next 5 years. It's actually a pretty powerful number. So if you take the PE ratio divided by the PEG, you know what the market thinks their growth and earnings is going to be the next several years. So which company is this? Eli Lilly. They're 60 divided by 1.44. The market is essentially, well, I can't do that in my head. 60. The market is expecting 42% growth a year the next 5 years for that company. That's pretty radical growth rate. Compare that to a Walmart. The PEG ratio is 289 versus 0.7. For Walmart, they're expecting 4% growth. Right? Does 4% growth for the next 5 years seem okay for Walmart? Doesn't seem all that radical, does it? Seems pretty reasonable. So for Eli Lilly, they're expecting 42% growth. What's the chance Eli Lilly won't hit that number? Pretty high. Much higher. I mean, which of these companies do you think have a better chance of hitting their growth number? If you had to pay me $1 million if you picked the wrong one in 5 years, which one would you pick? I have to pay you $1 million. If you're right, you have to pay me $1 million if you're wrong. Which one would you put the money on? Would you go with Walmart? 42%. We're not talking 42% on a firm with $20 million in revenue. We're talking 40% growth in a firm already making over $6 billion. Think about that. They're making $6 billion. The market thinks that in 5 years, their earnings is going to be $35 billion. Do you think Eli Lilly is going to be making $35 billion in 5 years? If not, then you may want to short their stock. So the market's really, really excited about Eli Lilly right now. Probably exaggerated, probably not going to work. So there's your numerators, there's your denominators, price to earnings, price to book, EV to EBITDA, EV to EBIT, EV to revenue. All right, those are your choices. So make sure you line these up. We just talked about that. Here's all the choices you have. Earnings based. Book. Here's a really, really good one here. You can actually do price, not price to book value, but you can do price and divide it by the last 10 years sum of earnings. There's actually a famous model. So what's McDonald's price to book right now? When you go in there, you want to get McDonald's price to book, and what does it say? Why is it NA? Well, look at their financials. What do you notice on their balance sheet? What's their net worth? It's a negative number. You can't do a price to book. Why is it a negative number? Because they bought so much of their stock back. But if you want to do a price to book McDonald's, you can't do it with this, but you could take McDonald's price and divide it by the last 10 years of earnings. There's a really famous model out there called the Cape. No, I can't spell Schiller. Have y'all loaded this? He's got it free online. He's changed his website, but you can download this for free. What Schiller does is he looks at the US stock market and he takes the price divided by the last 10 years of earnings to see if the stock market's overpriced or underpriced. And right now he's saying it's overpriced. So this is a really, really good one. If you got a firm like Boeing or McDonald's or Starbucks that has negative net worth, but you want to do a price to book, you can just do price the last 10 years of earnings. And then revenue base or EV to sales. Okay, which one do you do and when? Earnings base work really, really good, well for firms that are just in the high growth space, like tech stocks. So for all tech stocks, NVIDIA, Microsoft, you're going to use probably EV to EBITDA. That's going to be the most popular one to use. Book value you use for firms with high capital requirements, like a Boeing. That's why Boeing right now with negative net worth, you want to use price to book, but you can't because you don't have book value. But utilities, manufacturing, price to book works really well for cyclical companies like energy companies, material companies like steel companies, where their prices go up and down. Price to book works really well. And then almost always for banks and insurance companies that are focused on return on invested capital, use price to book. All right. And price to book right now for banks is really, really quite fascinating. What would you think the price to book for Citibank would be? So book value is what the accountants think it's worth. And the accountants say they're conservative, right? You accounting majors, accounting is conservative. So the price to book should be what? Greater than 1 or less than 1? Should be greater than 1. Well, let's look at Citibank. And their price to book is 0.52. They're trading almost half the value of what the accountants think. Why are they so cheap? What do you think JP Morgan's trading at? Higher or lower? Better bank or a worse bank? Probably over 1, right? Their price to book's 169. Why is Citibank so cheap right now? If the accountants are conservative, then you should be able to buy Citibank for at least $1, but you can buy it for 50 cents. That's pretty cheap. And what about Cullen Frost? What do you think Cullen Frost is doing? Higher or lower than JP? Who thinks there might be higher? Cullen Frost is a pretty good bank, right? Look at that. Why are they trading so rich? What does the market love about Cullen Frost? They've got one thing nobody else has. They have a low loan to deposit ratio, which means they have a lot of deposits, but they haven't loaned much out. They'd be a great takeover candidate. So it's a great bank. Trading real expensive. The market loves them. All right. So we'll refresh here. We'll talk about this really important page right here. So make sure, you might want to carry that in your wallet. All right, I'll stop it there. So you put your dates in here. What's the first date? Anybody remember that? You want today. And then what do you add to that? 182, 183. Then what do you add to the next one? 365, depending on if it's leap year or not. I mean, you can adjust it if you want to because of leap year. I like having the day the same, but it doesn't have to be. All right, so, and our WAC is, where is it? 7.8%. So net present value, just use the equal MPV, X MPV, excuse me. You put the rate in there and the values, the dates, and Bill Gates does all the work. Does that look like what y'all got?
Yeah.
And do you accept or not? Accept because MPV is greater than 0. That's all I mean by the why. Do you accept and why? Accept because. All right. IRR, same thing. Equal X IRR. The values, the dates. That one's really straightforward. 12%. And what do you say here? Accept because IRR is greater than WAC. And then payback. That's the hard one, right? So you've got to do the cumulative net present value. At time 0, it's negative. And then you do equal X MPV. Start with the rate. You want to lock that in. Put the values in there. The dates. Then you want to make sure you're locking in the first one. So the very last number should be the same as your net present value. So what you're asking here, and this is where you can do it. I gave you all that complicated formula, but you don't actually need it. So you skip time 0. They're still negative, so you need all of that year. They're still negative, so you need all of that year. So here on the last year, you went from negative 142 to positive 332. So this last year, you added 74. So you start off with a deficit. So you need 81% of that year. So that's probably the hardest part. If you completely miss the payback, it's not going to kill you on the exam. You may get 80% credit or something. But you can see they added 174,000. They went from a negative 142, ended up 32. So how much of that 174,000 they need? Well, they start off with deficit of 142, so they must have needed 81%. So the payback. It's the sum of those. And what was their target? Cut off at 2.8 years. Here you slightly reject as payback. It's greater than 2.8, but it wasn't much. Might be a toss-up. I'm not asking you to approve the project overall. I'm just on the individual pieces. All right. So I'm keeping it very, very simple here. You just have to know the criteria. All right. So I realize that this kind of payback's the hardest part, but practice that. On the application, I gave you the complicated formula, but you're not going to have that on exam. But you see, you don't really need that. If it's still negative, you need all the year. Notice you ignore time 0 because that's not a year. That's time 0. If it's negative, you need all of that year. You just have to figure out when in the year did you go from negative to positive. So you had to get rid of all the 142,000. You went from, however much you added that last year, that's the percentage you need. So it's a theoretical number. All right. So I'll see how y'all did on that. Looking at the fact exam, this one gets a little bit tough because on the fact exam, they don't give you any dates. They just tell you the years. So if you look at this fact exam question, you have a property, they're going to purchase it for 1.8 million, and they have benefits of 500, 750, and 1 million. I like to use the mid-year convention, but they don't do that on the exam. They just assume these cash flows happen exactly at the end of the year. You've got a little bit of a problem if you do equal MPV. Your rate here, they say, is 10%. And then you do the values, and you notice that doesn't exist in the answers. So you have to be real careful on the net present value function. It assumes all of these cash flows happen. This in 1 year, and 2 years, and 3 years, and 4 years. The real thing is that this happened at time 0, 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. So we're off by 1 year. That's why we're not finding the answer. So what you have to do on the exam, I'll give you a couple approaches. One is you can do equal MPV, but ignore the time 0, and then just subtract the time 0. All right. So that's just the nature of it. Bill Gates doesn't give you a choice. And I got to put the rate in there. Sorry. So 0.1, and then the cash flows. So you can use the formula, and then you see it gives you the $25,000. What else could you do though? If you want to make it like our class, what could you do? Well, you could make this equal today, and then you just add 365, right? Because they're assuming everything's a year out. Now you can use the XMPV. And you'll get like that XMPV. I don't know what I did wrong. I forgot to put the dates in there. Sorry. Oh, Bill Gates, boy, he's useless. And that gives you the 25,000. So if you like using the equal today, you can. Just realize in the fact exam, you always assume is exactly 1 year out. You don't use that mid-year convention we're using, and then it will still work, especially if you go to the no decimal places. All right. On this one, this is Gerardo's question. They have a project that has an IRR of 14%. What's the IRR standard? You accept it if it's what? No, less than. If the IRR is greater than what? WACC. Do y'all see that in here? Should undertake this project if its WACC is less than 14%. That sounds correct, right? Undertake it if the WACC exceeds 14. No, you want the IRR to be greater than. So the C is the correct answer. Undertake this project if the WACC is less than the IRR. And this last one's very simple. You got a project costs $3,000, cash flows of $1,500, and then at the last year you get another $1,500 plus $800. So you just have to read it. I don't know, they word it like this. It's so bizarre. Has a cash flow of $1,500 in the first 2 years, and another $800. Y'all know what salvage value means? Have y'all heard that term before? That's what you get when you sell something in the future. It's a positive number. And so that's it. So IRR is pretty straightforward. You just do equal IRR, and that's it. I mean, you're done. It's a really simple formula, 16%. So that one's really straightforward. All right. So the fact exam, it's a little bit tricky to associate with our class, because to me, it makes no sense to assume cash flows are exactly 1 year. You know, what project you have, everything shows up exactly in 1 year. All your cash flow, nothing happens in between. That just is a bizarre project, but that's what they assume on the fact. A few other questions of stuff that we've done before. Present value, we did that on Tuesday. I wonder if y'all can do this. I'll pay 10,000 anyone who can do it, unless I change my mind later. What is the present value of $100,000 received in 5 years if your discount rate's 800? Anybody remember how to do that? If you're accounting, finance, actuarial science, this should be a piece of cake. This is what you do your whole career. If you're a marketing major, then maybe you're off the hook. but you should still know it. Anybody know what's the formula there?
Equals.
Well, let's not use the PV function. I mean, you can, but, well, okay, if you want to use the PV function, what's the PV function say? Rate 0.08. What's the number of periods? 5. What's the payment? 0. What's the future value? So you can do that. You have to always start with the minus, but yeah, 68,058. Or what can you do? 100,000 divided by 1.08 to the 5th. I prefer you know that because it's better you know it than Bill Gates. He's already wealthy. You want to become wealthy, so you have to know the function. That's what the function actually is. You remember that? Present value equals future value divided by 1 plus the rate raised to the n. You need to know that function. Even though Bill Gates does all the work for you, you still got to know the function. All right. Erin places $200 in savings that pays 7% interest compounded monthly. How much money will she have in 3 years? So here you could use the future value function, right? What's your rate? 7%. Number of periods, 3. Payment is 0. And your present value is 200. So 245. So you can do that, or you take 200 times 1 plus 0.07 raised to the 3. I prefer you do that because that's what a future value is, present value times 1. So the present value is the future value divided by 1 plus the rate to n. The future value is the present value times, but you should know those formulas. Your grandmother bought a house 40 years ago for 20,000. The day she sold it for 92,000. What was her rate of return? I prefer you know the formula on this one. I think there is a rate function that I never use. We can maybe figure it out. Number of periods, let's see, 40. Payment is 0. Present value is 20,000. Future value is 92,000. I think I have to have a negative number in there somewhere. So that's not how I do it. Anybody know how I would do it? This is a really important function. I would do 92,000 divided by 20,000 raised to the 1 over 40 minus 1. Have we used this function before? Really, really important function. We kind of did it with the CAGR. Remember the CAGR in project 1? So your annual return, you in finance are going to use this thing a bunch. It's your ending value over your beginning value raised to the 1 divided by n minus 1. Use that formula a lot. We like things on annual basis for some reason because our mind thinks in annual returns. I mean, you could say it's true. She ended with 92,000 and she invested 40,000. So you can say she was up 2.3 times, but our minds can't think 230%. We got to have it on an annual basis. 3.89, is that a great return? If she had done better in the stock market, maybe if she just stayed in the apartment, whatever. That's, it's kind of 389 is a much easier number for us to handle. But you can use the rate function if you get one of these. Just make sure you have to have a negative number. And then here, Kenneth has a 10,000 he's placing in savings that pays 6%. Makes no other deposit draw. How long would it take for him to grow to 25,000? Here's one on the fact exam. Sometimes I'm in a hurry. I don't want to think about all the formulas. So I just set them all up as a problem. 11.13, 13.5, 14.27, 1573. And there I would just say equal future value. My rate was 0.06. My number of periods is 11.13. My payments are 0. And my present value is 10,000. And what we're asking, how long does it take to get to $25,000? So you can do that, right? So if you're on the fact exams, like, well, I can't remember the formula in Excel, I can't remember the formula. I know the formula if they tell me it's 11.13, I know the formula to get the future value, but they're asking me to figure this number out. Well, just calculate everything and pick the answer that gives you the right answer, right? Don't panic on the exam. Just, it's so fast, especially in Excel, to just calculate all 4 answers and see which one gives you the right one. So that one can certainly work for you. And this one, Sam took out $15,000 4-year loan to buy a new car. What is this payments? Y'all remember the function for that?
Yeah.
EMT. So again, what's your rate? 8%, man. Bill Gates does everything for you. How many periods? Be careful. Well, it's not 8%, is it? 8% divided by 12. How many periods are there? 48, 4 years. You can do 4 times 12. You want to. Bill Gates can handle that. What's your payment? That's what we're trying to figure out. And what's your present value? 15,000 bucks. There is no future value. There's your payment, 366.19. Right? But that's also what that present value interest factor annuity function that we used, that you're actually using in there. Can y'all handle this on the fact? How many of y'all have to take the fact? Here, about 7 of y'all, 8 of y'all. Can y'all handle the fact? We'll try. Well, this one's pretty straightforward. Rachel is due to receive 2 payments. She will get 1,000 in 1 year and 2,000 in 2 years. Remember, present value is so simple. It's future value divided by 1 plus the rate raised at the time. Real straightforward. So on this one, she gets $1,000 in 1 year, $1,000 divided by 1.06 raised to the 1. The 6% is for that first year, 8% for the second year. She gets 2,000 divided by 1 plus 0.08 raised to the second. So 2658, 2658. All right. A problem like that, about the only thing you can do is just use the formula. You could use the future value formula twice if you wanted to. It'd be a lot of work to do that. Future value. No, this is a present value. A present value, you could do it twice, one for the $1,000, one for the $2,000 if you wanted to, but that would be a lot of extra work. I wouldn't do that. So you can just use that function twice. Y'all know the answer to this, number 7. As the discount rate increases, what happens to present value? Approaches 0, right? It comes down. A higher discount rate reduces your present value. What does it do to future value? What if they asked you about this on future value? Discount rate increases, what happens to future value? It approaches infinity. All right. So higher discount rate increases future value, higher discount rate reduces present value. What is perpetuity? This is a tricky question. I bet a lot of students. Y'all remember perpetuity? When does a perpetuity stop? 1 year after infinity. So it goes on forever and ever and ever. What's the value of perpetuity? I can't even say the word. I can't even spell it. It's real simple. It's just the cash flow divided by the rate. Real simple. And so here, but it's a trick question. They say, okay, $1,000 and our rate is 4%. So that's worth $25,000. But when does it start? It starts in 5 years. So that's the future value. We need the present value for that. What's the present value of that? $25,000 divided by 1 plus 0.04 raised to the 5. But there's a huge problem with the fact exam I wish they would fix. What does starting in 5 years mean? That means, does that mean at the beginning of 5 years or at the end of 5 years? What does the question say? Doesn't tell you, does it? So you notice 2548 is not in the answer. So what do they mean starting in 5 years? They mean at the beginning of 5 years. When is the beginning of 5 years? It's in 4 years. All right. Isn't it horrible that they do that? So 21370 is the right answer. So what you can do is try them both and find the one that works. The problem with that is, let's see. Yeah, this one right here. Look at number 12. A firm is planning on paying its first dividend of $2 in 3 years. After that, dividends are expected to grow 6%. So $2 divided by 0.06. I'm sorry, divided by, well, remember our perpetuity, a growth perpetuity, the value there equals the cash flow divided by the rate minus growth. That's what we did with the dividend discount model. So if you have a growth rate, you don't just divide by the rate, you divide by the rate minus the growth rate. So I like that spelling even better than the right one, but all right. So 2 years, they pay $2. Your discount rate's 14% minus 0.06. So that stock's going to be worth $25, but in 3 years. So you have to take that and divide it by, and watch this, this is so irritating. 1 point plus 0.14, raise it to 3. There it is, 1687. But that's in 3 years. Is that the beginning of 3 years or the end of 3 years? We say, well, I'll try 2 years just to show that it's not in there. And what do you notice? It's there too. I have no idea which is the right answer. I think, for you taking the fact exam, I think when they say something happens in 3 years, they mean the beginning of 3 years. So use 2. I think that's what they do, but I can't tell you for sure. I should talk to Dr. Maynard and say, y'all need to fix this question because it's really infuriating. Whoever wrote the question is really infuriating. So actually both answers would be correct depending on your interpretation. All right, so I think I got a couple of more, but well, we did that one, right? So yeah, we've done them all.
Did you say for number 6 you can use the PV function for the
number 6? What do you mean number 6?
Question number 6.
In here?
Yes. Did you say you can use like that the PV?
Well, you could equal PV just for the 1,000. So the rate for the 1,000 is 6%. Number of periods was just 1. The payment was 0, and the future value was 1,000. That gives you the present value of that one.
For that one, the other one. For the other one, you have to do the
number.
For the 2001, the second payment.
Yeah. So you have to do that one, and then you do the same thing. PV, the rate is 0.08. Number of periods is 2. Payment 0, and the future value is $2,000. So yeah, there you'd add the 2 together. If you wanted to, I mean, you could. Yeah. Right. All right, any questions on that? Hopefully y'all do all right on the fact exam. I've had some students that have failed it like 5, 6 times. I forget how many tries do you get? We get 3 times. Yeah. Some are like desperate, what do I do? But the hardest part is going to be some of the questions related to paper 1 that we did. Because I didn't cover the current ratio, but they do ask the current ratio on the exam. Your answer should be NA because no one uses this in finance, but that's not one of the answers. Or NA, see Dr. Baynot. All right, let's finish up relative value. For relative value, you have earnings base, relative values, book value base, revenue base. So remember on earnings base, you can use that for any industry, but high tech stocks, they love EV to EBITDA, price to earnings. Book value based for these type of companies, utilities, manufacturing that have a lot of property, plant, and equipment. Cyclical companies like Exxon, Valero, they'll use price to book. And then banks and insurance companies almost always use price to book. And then revenue base, you always, for retailers, you always use EV to revenue. It's just real common. So if you're looking at a stock, you're trying to do an analysis, that's the kind of analysis you would use EV to sales. So how do you do relative value analysis? It's good for screening stocks. If you want to learn how to do this, we have several videos on my YouTube channel that shows you how to do it. You can build your own stock portfolio. If you go to my channel, there's one for aerospace that works really, really well. It shows you how to get a really good ranking model. You could do this for bonds as well. We won't get into that. What if you have a non-publicly traded company? So USAA sold its investments to Victory Capital. Victory Capital had to value that. You could have looked at competitors that are publicly traded to value it. So what I would have used for Victory Capital, I would have looked at what USAA had in assets under management and compare that to BlackRock's value to assets under management or another publicly traded. I actually think Victory Capital got a steal on that transaction. But just you can use it. So if you're valuing, let's say USA wanted to sell its bank, which would make a lot of sense because that bank has been a major problem for them. How would they sell it? They'd look at the price to book of maybe Capital One, and they'd apply that to USAA, and that's probably the price they would get for it. It'd be pretty straightforward. If you look at a Capital One, which is probably the firm that's the most like USAA's bank, COF. Their price to book is only 0.93. So USA could say, hey, we look a lot like Capital One. We'll just take our net worth multiplied by 0.93, and that's what our starting value would be. Some of y'all will have projects like this, especially finance majors, in a capstone class. Will that ask you to value a firm? And you'll go find 5 similar firms and get their price to book or their price to earnings. You'll say, okay, this is where they range, and you'll apply that to your firm. So real simple project. You see it a lot in the capstone. When do y'all take capstone? Is that like 6 years away or something, or next semester? Y'all sophomores, right? Or juniors, or seniors that have been avoiding this class your entire. It gives you great benchmarks for companies if you're trying to figure out, hey, why is our stock so cheap versus everybody else? You say, wow, our margins are just not very good. We got to get our margins up, or our turnover is not very good. So it gives you good. I did this with USAA. It works very, very effectively. And then if you watch my video, it also tells you what is the stock market most focused in on. You can bring in a bunch of data and you can say, hey, which of these pieces of data best explain why this stock is trading rich or cheap? So it's pretty powerful. All right, I'm not going to show you the last part, but you can teach yourself how to build your own models. I'm trying to get the investment society to start doing this again. We used to do this called Sector Wars, where you build models and you make recommendations. And oh, it was so incredible. The dean was asking about it. It's like, yeah, we want to do that again. COVID shut it down, but before COVID, it was really impressive what we were able to do. All right, that's it for relative value. So what I want to do in the notes is real quickly go through forecasting. Forecasting is very, very important for finance and accounting majors, and obviously actuarial science. So a forecast is some deterministic view of the future. You're trying to predict the future. Usually future financial statements, maybe what cap expenditures you need. You have certain assumptions. Forecast can be short-term, 1 to 2 years. They can be long-term. At USA, we used to do 5 years, and then we suddenly started doing 7 years. And that's only because in 1993, the CEO says, hey, let's go out the year 2000. And then they just kept the 7 years for some reason, but you can go out longer. I've heard firms that go out 50 years, which seems pretty laughable, right? Who knows what's going to happen 50 years from now? Forecasts can be bottoms up, where when I started my career, this is where I was, where you go to each department and say, I remember asking the quality assurance, I forget her name, Pam, I think it was. I said, what are you going to spend on pencils in 3 years? It was like, seemed like such a stupid question. And she would come back with her forecast. What did she do? She probably looked at what she spent last year and just increased it by 5% or something. It can be top down, which is when Bob Davis came to USA, that's what it was. He just said, here's the numbers I want. Y'all figure out how to get these numbers. So management comes down and dictates it. Bottoms up supposedly are more accurate. Accountants, I hate to step on your toes. Accountants believe that the more detailed you make your forecast, the more accurate it is. I don't believe that. I think that's a complete misnomer. It makes you feel more accurate because you're getting down these nitgrit, but when you're talking about forecasting, just because you go down to a really, really low level doesn't mean people are going to forecast better. Top down gives you more of senior management's objectives, but it might just not reflect reality. A lot of firms, they do very bottom up detail for 2 years, and then the out years are more skilled. All right, so if you want to destroy your chances for a job in an interview, you can ask this question and ask your firm, why do they forecast? What would USAA say? USA spends billions of dollars every year building these forecasts out 5, 10 years. Why do they do that, do you think? Why do you think they would tell you they do that? It's millions of dollars, right? They could just stop. What if USA just stopped doing forecasts? Would the firm go under? Would it go out of business? So why do they forecast? Any guesses? In an interview, say, well, why do y'all do forecasts? It's really expensive. My guess is they might say something to make decisions. You think they might say that? And then this is the question you're going to ask where you won't get the job. Give me one decision you've made in the last 10 years based on your forecast. And the answer to that is what? Never. We've never made a decision based on the forecast. How did it work at USAA? At USAA, we had this army of people building a forecast. I was responsible for the bond side. Man, you've seen that model. It's so convoluted. We built it. We went to the CEO and he said, no, that's not right. I want the numbers higher. So went back, reran everything, went back. He says, no, numbers be higher. Finally, they just asked the CEO, what number do you want? And you just plugged and matched that number. So what decision did they make on that forecast? The CEO had already made the decision. And what was his decision? It was real obvious. He just wanted numbers higher. If last year was 50 million, it needs to be 60 million. Do you need an army of people doing forecasts to do that? All you need is a CEO to tell you what the numbers are. I don't think any firm makes a decision based off of forecasts. I think USAA could stop doing forecasting 100% and you would not even notice it. Don't say that in an interview because they're not gonna like that. But y'all may not agree with me, but my sense of it, boy, we're certainly wasting a lot of time on these forecasts because no one uses them. So I have a radically different approach. Purpose of forecasts. Y'all ready for this? It's risk management. It's not decision making, it's risk management. So you're going to do this on your project. That's the reason I'm bringing this up. The purpose of forecasting is not deterministic. You're not trying to predict the future. I'm going to use this guy, Paul Schaefer. I'm going to use his term. The goal is to set the cone of uncertainty. What is the cone of uncertainty? The range of futures. That to me is the purpose of a forecast. It is to express how uncertain you are. Our revenues could be between this and this. Our expenses could be between this and this. It's that cone of uncertainty. You're trying to do is define your level. I'm going to use a word people don't like, but ignorance. How uncertain are you? You're going to define that. If the range is really, really wide, then you have a lot of risk. If the range is pretty narrow, then you're doing pretty well. So I believe this is the purpose of forecasting. If you do a deterministic forecast, which is what USAA does, a one forecast, what's the probability that's going to happen? Who knows? We have no clue. What's the probability they'll be higher than that or lower than that? No one knows. Now they could figure that out, right? They could go back to all their prior forecasts and see how good or bad they were. Were they usually over on revenues, over on expenses? They could do that. How often do you think they do that? They've never done that in their entire history. Why? Because it's too embarrassing. Because their forecasts are horrible. Not because they're not smart people. It's just that predicting the future is really, really tough. Another question you can ask in an interview, which can get you in trouble. Say, okay, you got a 10-year forecast. Do you expect a recession in the next 10 years? Oh yeah, there'll be a recession in the next 10 years. How many recessions are in your forecast? None. Okay, you're sure you're gonna have a recession, but you didn't forecast one. Does that make sense? So, I mean, there's a lot of things that just make no sense. Now, some of y'all may end up in forecasting planning at USAA. You're not gonna, if you ask these questions, you won't, but I mean, just look around and say, why are we doing this? Man, this is a lot of work. Twice a year, they do these major conferences are looking at these forecasts. Yeah, so I believe this is the goal of forecasting. So on your projects, you're going to do what? A base case, a worst case, and a best case. That's the reason you're doing it, is to understand the risk. And risk can be two-sided. What's your upside versus what's your downside? So you want to say, hey, man, I got a lot of upside. My downside's pretty limited. This sounds like a great project. Or I don't have much upside, but boy, the downside's horrible. That's the kind of thing you're looking for. The other thing you do with this type of analysis is you pay for information to reduce the con. Where do you spend your money? You're spending your money to get information to reduce that con, bring it in. If you think in those terms, then that makes you spend your budgets a whole lot better. Now, you're not spending money on your projects, but you do have to ask, when you do the range of your futures, could you spend more time on a particular assumption to get more confidence in what that range would be, so you're not so massively out there? But I think most firms waste time and money on forecasts. I think most of them do it because they think we're supposed to do it. It's like, well, everybody does them, so we got to do a forecast. But I think it's an incredible waste of time and effort. Yeah, I'm actually serious. I think USA should shut the whole thing down and stop doing forecasts entirely and not even bother. I built a model with the actuaries to do this. And we made some major decisions based off of that with the risk management. And we saw one huge risk and we fixed it. And that one thing saved USA probably over $1 billion just in 2008 alone, just by seeing, well, we got this big risk, we need to fix that. You would have never seen that in a deterministic forecast, but when we had that range and we looked at our exposure to interest rates, yeah, we put in a project, you know, that was valuable, but the stuff they do, yeah. I'm not trying to discourage you from working in those departments, but I'm just telling you, you know, ask the question, why are we doing all this? Wouldn't you like a job where it's actually valuable to the firm versus just getting paid to go through the motions? So facilitative firm decision making, I don't actually agree with that. I think it's facilitate risk management. One thing you got to ask is how are competitors going to react? You got to worry about new technology, those kind of things. So it's interesting. I was listening to the business breakdown on I can never remember this, Duolingo. Maybe I'll use Duolingo. I didn't realize they were publicly traded, but boy, it's really impressive firm. I didn't know they had any revenue because I didn't think anybody paid for them. But about 8% of their customers pay the subscription. But I like Duolingo because you think about AI, there's two AIs out there. There's the producers and there's the users. The producers are who? NVIDIA. Who's making money right now off of AI?
Microsoft.
What producers or users?
Oh, okay.
Producers. Who's not figured out how to make money on AI yet? The users. How is Walmart reducing its expenses or increasing its revenues based on AI? I don't think they are yet. But what I thought was interesting with Duolingo is I don't pay money for Duolingo, but they're talking about using AI to create conversations in a foreign language that will automatically adjust to your level in that language. I say, okay, I'd be willing to pay for that. Use a large language model, and they're going to hear my Spanish and go, okay, you're kind of like a 18-month-old. We'll give you that Spanish, and you can talk to someone. I might do that. That would be willing to pay. I'd be paid for it. So there would be an example of Duolingo using AI to bring more customers in, a user side. That would be pretty exciting to me. We got to get AI to that point. If you're trying to forecast and you're doing Duolingo, man, how successful is that going to be? Duolingo's going into mathematics, which I think is pretty cool. Down in Costa Rica, they're using Khan Academy. The problem with Khan Academy is you don't know the level of the students, so they're just going to be out there, doing what they're doing. If Duolingo can come up with a math program that says, oh, wow, you're really good at this, we'll give you more advanced problems, or you're not very good at this, we'll give you simpler problems, the student then, instead of getting bored or frustrated, you got something exactly at their level. That would be pretty exciting. So I love that. That was a podcast that said, okay, I can see how AI could radically change this industry and how Duolingo could be at the front edge of that. And they're actually making monies, which is pretty unusual for a firm that young. So that's what I love. But if you're forecasting that, boy, you're pretty uncertain on how that's going to work out. But it gives you exciting. Your upside might be massive. Your downside is going to be the cost of whatever you're developing with your developers. Your financial forecast, you got to make sure you have what the economy is doing, inflation, interest rates, those type of things. You got to ask about sales. Revenue is the single most important thing in a forecast for any business. What are your revenues doing? Most firms, once they know the revenues, they can kind of figure out their costs and expenses in a somewhat decent way. And then here, I love this book. I do recommend this book. Unfortunately, Christensen passed away a couple years ago. But Seeing What's Next, really, really good, especially if you're finance, because finance, you're trying to find the next trend before it hits. And that's what this book is all about. Really, really good book. And what he's really talking about, which is really, really interesting, is this concept of disruptive innovation. Some firm comes out of left field and just completely destroys the existing players. How does that happen? When does it work? When does it not work? How can you see it? And that's what he's saying. I mean, look at the title of the book. That'd be pretty cool. That sounds like forecasting, doesn't it? Using theories of innovation to predict industry change. If you're a finance person and you can figure that out, you're going to make a lot of money, because that's what you're after, is to find those big sea changes. So it's a good book. It's a little dated, isn't it? I don't know when he wrote it. There he is right there, but I don't remember when he passed away. It's been a couple of years. Here, let me see. He's got a couple of books out there. This was the best one, though. The show, yeah, 2020. So just recently. Real nice guy, very brilliant. I would read these type of books. Another book I highly recommend is Super Forecasters. I think we talked about that one. Why does that happen? Oh. What happened to my why am I no longer? All right, Bill Gates. I don't know what he's doing to me, but oh, there it is. Y'all know Philip Tetlock? Have y'all heard his name? I would read almost all of his books, but this is a great book. What he's doing is they have all these models where they're asking people, or these websites, they're asking people to make forecasts. And they have enough data now, they can go in and see who are the good forecasters. And then they're looking at what's the difference between the good forecasters and the bad forecasters. If I were a finance major, I would be reading that book, because I want to know because you got to be a good forecaster in finance. What is it about the good forecasters that make them good? So yeah, really, really good book. He's written some other books as well. I can't remember the names of them, but he's a good author. All right. So forecasting is important. I think it's more important to forecast the distribution of the future than to try to guess 1 point forecast. But yeah, so it's tough. But revenue is the most important thing. You've got to get revenues right, or the rest of the forecast is just garbage. All right. That's it for forecasting. So we're going to jump to cost of capital. How are your applications going? So y'all gone gotten the first two. Y'all following the videos? Everything's working? Are y'all following the videos okay? Or am I too fast? Some people say I'm too slow, but you know, you can speed up YouTube 75 to 125%. So, all right, good. All right, let's talk cost of capital. We've seen it before, but we haven't really done much with it. What I want to do is jump to the final answer and then work back to it. All right. So let's go to the end and we'll work back to it so you can see where we're going. So the cost of capital is called WACC. It means the weighted average cost capital. Boy, I can't get one word. What is capital? Capital is net worth and debt. It's the stockholders and the debt holders. Did they demand a return? Absolutely. The stockholders want a return. The debt holders, are you going to loan someone money for free? If you could borrow money for free, how much would you borrow? I'd borrow 3 trillion and stick it in a treasury, right? So they're going to charge money, right? Because of the time value of money. So how much do they demand? And that's what we're going to look at. And it's also weighted average. So how much are you using of stockholders versus how much are you using in debt? So you use all stockholders and use no debt. So that's the Lululemon, right? Lululemon doesn't like debt. So you use massive amounts of debt and very little stockholder, like a Ford or Kroger's been doing. So you balance 50-50. Is there an optimal level? So you'd be 60% stock, 40% debt. Is that more optimal than 50-50? Those are the kind of questions you're going to ask. But what is this formula? So this formula is the weight of debt. I'm going to call that WD times the cost of debt. I'm going to call that KD. Why K? I don't know. K for cost. We don't spell very well in finance, but there must be a C somewhere else. But weight of debt times the cost of debt. We're going to make one other adjustment here, but I'll do it in a second. Plus the weight of E. Anybody want to guess what that is? WE. Anybody know what that is? The weight of equity. We call it equity. It's really stockholders. Weight of equity. Anybody want to guess what the next part is? Times what? Cost of equity. Exactly. We got to make one more adjustment here. When a firm pays its stockholders by paying dividends, is that tax deductible or not? Anybody know? Have y'all studied that Peyton tax class? When a firm pays a dividend, it's not tax deductible. Y'all talk about that for tax class. So yeah, dividends are not tax deductible. What about debt? You pay interest, is that tax deductible? That is tax deductible. So debt, we also have to multiply by 1 minus the tax rate. Because debt is tax deductible, dividends are not. Should we change that? I think so. There's some great papers on why we should make dividends tax deductible. I mean, Peyton, you wouldn't like it, but if they did that, there'd probably be no tax accountants working at firms because they wouldn't pay tax. They just pay out our income as dividends and not pay any tax. So it wouldn't be great for the tax world, but I think it'd be great for everybody else. So that's the formula. That's pretty straightforward. So the weight of debt plus the weight of equity should equal what? What do you think? Any guesses there? 20%, 30%, 50%? What do you think? Should equal 100%. Now, in the other classes, other 13, the ones with 300 students in them, They do a bunch of other, they do preferred stock and all this other stuff. You don't need that. If you work in this department, you'll need it, but very few of you are gonna ever need that. First of all, almost no firms use preferred stock anymore. It's overkill to do that. Some of them actually even put, I saw the textbook for the other class. They even have issuing costs in there. Man, that's overkill. You don't need to know this basic that we're doing here is really all you need. It's just overkill to do that. Huh?
The one minus the TRs, you said that was the.
Tax rate. Yeah, weight of debt times cost of debt times 1 minus the tax rate plus weight of equity times cost of debt. All right, cost of debt, you've already done. We did it when we priced bonds. Y'all remember what it was there? What did you do when we did bonds?
That's what's big.
See if I can find it. I know I have it on the machine. We did it last class, right? So how do we get the KD for this stock? Anybody see it there? Treasury plus the spread. So you've already done that part. There's nothing new there. The treasury plus the spread. What's another word for the treasury? Risk-free rate plus the spread. Where'd you get the spread? Well, you look at, is it 5 years bond, 10-year bond, and what's the credit rating? Remember that? You just pull it right off the table. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay, E we did when we valued stocks, but we haven't really talked about it yet. We're going to use the CAPM anyway. Remember that formula we mentioned in class? Real simple formula.
Beta times the market risk premium.
All right, that's the end of it. Now the effective yield was up in here and you don't really need it here, but it looks really similar to this one. Well, the spread, beta times market risk premium really is the spread for the stock. So what piece do we need? The risk-free rate. Risk-free rate plus the spread, risk-free rate plus beta times market risk premium. Now the other classes do KE like this, and you'll see this actually on the fact exams. So I got to tell you, they do risk-free rate plus beta times the required return on stocks minus the risk-free rate. The required return on stocks minus risk-free rate is what the market risk premium is. Most textbooks, most exams, they do it like this. In practice, no one does it like that. So I don't like doing it like the textbook does it because it's just not done in practice. Everybody in the real world, they just talk about this number, which is really is this number, but they just talk about it. So beware on the fact exam, they're going to probably have you do that one extra step. What's the required return on stocks minus risk-free rate? That's the definition of the risk-free of the market risk premium. The market risk premium is what return you need on stocks minus risk-free rate to induce you to buy stocks. So be careful. You'll see this a lot more in academia. You'll never see it after you graduate. All right. So there's the whole formula for weighted average cost of capital. If you are interested in a firm, so let's say you have a capstone class and you're doing WAC, one thing I'd recommend in Bloomberg, just type in, let's say you're doing Apple, type Apple, hit the function 8 key, and then type WAC. So you may have a project in a class where they're asking for the WAC of a firm. Bloomberg will give you all kinds of details for that you could actually use in your class. They'll give you the cost of debt, they'll give you the weight of debt, they'll give you weight of equity, the cost of equity, they'll give you all those pieces. So Bloomberg actually has a function that does it. Any firm you enter in, you could do Walmart, anyone else. Maybe if I remember my next class, I'll bring one of those screens in. All right, so this is where we're working toward. You've already done this one really. There's no difference in what they're gonna do here than what we did for pricing the bond. I don't think you've done the bond yet for the applications, but you'll see that again. So it's pretty straightforward. And then the question we'll address here is there an optimal weight D, weight E that maximizes the value of the firm? You may know the two famous people who came up with this. I'm going to talk about them if you want to read ahead. There's these two guys named Miller and Dig. Fortunately, his name is spelled just like it sounds. Dig, yeah, I just can't spell. Modigliani. Huh?
Is it the top two? If you just want to click on it?
Yeah, I could. I was trying to practice my typing skills. So here they are. Merton Miller is probably the more famous of the two. There's Merton Miller. He passed away in 2000. And then Modigliani, he passed away. He made it further. You can kind of tell he made it 2003. They both passed away. They're both Nobel Prize winners. I used to think only one of them, because you have to be alive to win the Nobel Prize, but I think they both got it before they passed away. This is their theory. Wikipedia does a pretty good job of showing this. We're going to see charts like this. We're going to talk about this, but that's the whole question. The value of the firm. Can we increase the value in the firm and how we decide between our choice of debt versus equity? What do we say about debt? It's tax deductible. That sounds pretty good. Maybe we should load up on debt. Or maybe not. What did Miller County say about that? And they won a Nobel Prize for this theory, so that sounds pretty cool. So we'll get into that. This is called optimal capital structure. You can actually Google that as well. You're going to see Miller Modigliani if you do that. And what you're going to discover is optimal capital structure equals, let me blow your mind, is the exact same thing as saying minimum, guesses here. You maximize the value of the firm by doing what? Minimum WACC. All right, so I'm giving y'all some theory. I'm not sure I'm going to put this on exam too, because last year, that was the worst question by far on the exam. Kind of bugs me. You need to know this if you're a finance major. If you're not a finance major, you don't care, and I can understand why you don't care. But the finance majors need it. So maybe I'll be nice to you on the exam and just make sure the finance majors are reading this. This is pretty important for finance majors. It's accounting majors should probably care, but most of them don't. But anyway. All right, so that's where we're going. We're going to walk through this, but we've kind of already done some of this, and it really is. Probably our biggest issue is going to be this beta. How do we come up with the beta? We're not going to spend a lot of time on market risk premium. I'm going to talk the theory of it, but I'm pretty much going to give you that number. Again, if you're a finance major, you'll find a lot of places that refer to this number as the most important number in finance. So it's an important number. We're talking about really important stuff, but it's very theoretical. And it's only important really the finance majors, others don't. So we are going to spend a lot of time on the beta. One of your financial apps, probably the hardest one, is the beta one. And you'll see why it's the most difficult one. All right, I'll stop it there, but I just want to give y'all a head start of where we're going on this.